Most Pokémon evolve into or from another Pokémon, yet many are left lonely, standing solo as the only members of their evolutionary lines. But what if they weren't alone? Today, I'm going through every single standalone unevolving Pokémon and connecting them evolutionarily to other existing Pokémon. Some of these new evolutions will be so perfect that you'll be surprised that they aren't canon, but a lot more are gonna be stretches, so please be nice to me. Some clarifications before we begin. 1, legendaries, ultra beasts, and paradox Pokemon are excluded, since most are super designed not to involve evolutions. 2, if any of a Pokemon's forms can evolve, I excluded the entire species. So Cantonian Farfetch'd will not appear in this video because Galarian Farfetch'd can evolve. 3, Mega Evolutions don't count since they are not permanent. And 4, I totally ignored stats. This video was impossible to do otherwise. I wanted to focus on the lore and design connections, and besides, if these evolutions were canon, then the stats would reflect that. Let's progress in Dex order, beginning with Kangaskhan. There is a well-known fan theory that Cubone is a baby Kangaskhan that lost its mother. And while I don't think that's canon, it is interesting enough for me to say that Kangaskhan would evolve from Cubone. A Cubone that gives into its grief becomes Marowak, and the skull fuses to its face. But a Cubone that can process its trauma and move on, thus discarding the skull, will become Kangaskhan to finish out the motherly duties that its own mother could not. It even works with the typing. Most bone-related attacks are ground type, so getting rid of the skull removes the ground typing, reverting to normal. This could only happen for female Cubones though, since Kangaskhan are all female, and thus the males are destined to be broody, violent Marowak. It's a metaphor for men ignoring their mental health. Don't be Marowak, guys! Go to therapy. Next is Pinsir, and this entry is the first of several where there is an ideal answer that I cannot choose. To me, the obvious answer is that Pinsir and Heracross would share a baby form, akin to Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan later gaining Tyrogue. These bugs are not as connected as the Hitmons, but they're definitely counterparts. Pinsir and Scyther were counterparts in Gen 1, but then Scyther got Scizor and moved on. Both Pinsir and Heracross are based on horned beetles and are a version-exclusive pair a few times. They even have the same base stat total, which is not important for deciding evolutions in this video, but it is relevant to them being counterparts. The problem I have is that while I think a connecting baby is by far the most logical answer, that baby doesn't exist. And I said I'm connecting to existing Pokemon. This is gonna happen a few more times, so while I'll tell you when I think a connecting baby makes the most sense, I'm gonna give you an answer that only involves real existing Pokemon. So for this case, I say that Pinsir evolves into Heracross. It's an identical situation to Scyther. Gen 2 gives it a new evolution with a new secondary type, but the base stat total stays the same. Again, that doesn't matter. I just wanted to point out that Scyther and Scizor do actually have the same BST. Side note, if I connect an unevolving Pokemon to another unevolving Pokemon later in the Dex, like Pinsir and Heracross here, I will not bring up the later Dex one later in the video to avoid redundancy. Next is Tauros, and there's another obvious connecting baby to make here. That could have been phrased better. Tauros and Miltank evolving from the same baby makes perfect sense. Tauros is all male, Miltank all female, so a calf Pokemon that evolves into one or the other based on the gender is super obvious. Bouffalant could be a part of this too, since cows and bison are both bovines, but despite the close relation, I think it has a better evolution option that I'll discuss later. Alas, I need answers that do not invent any new Pokemon, and this was exceedingly difficult. This was the last entry I wrote for the entire video. The only other bovine Pokemon is Bouffalant, which, as I said, is tough to connect evolutionarily. It doesn't make sense for Bouffalant to evolve into Miltank and Tauros, or vice versa, because they all have the same power level vibes. I also could not find a single Pokemon to fill the role of a Tauros Miltank baby. Numel kinda worked, but not really because it's a camel, not a cow, and why would it have the gendered evolution into the normal types, but then still have Camerupt? It just didn't make sense. But eventually, I figured out my answers. And they are not good. But they are here. Miltank would be a branch evolution from Chansey. They're both pink normal types that are always female and nourish people with the food/drink they create. Miltank its milk and Chansey its egg. Additionally, since Miltank and Blissey are next to each other in the decks, I feel like there's gotta be one person out there who thought they were evolutionarily connected. As for how the egg thing becomes a cow, well, actually, you see, Tauros would be a branch evolution from Deerling. It's not great, but at least they're both hoofed normal types. Maybe male ones that get too rowdy, lose connection to nature and thus their grass type, and evolve into Tauros and just start charging everywhere. Maybe Nummel is better. I don't know, this one sucked. Just give us the new Tauros Miltank calf, okay? Next is Lapras, and due to its shell, water typing, and design based on a prehistoric reptile, there is a clear connection here. A split evolution from Tirtuga. They don't look that alike, but they look more alike than Gloom and Bellossom. Maybe Tirtuga becomes Caracosta normally, but maybe it turns into Lapras with an Ice Stone. Next is Ditto, and this one is tricky. I considered simply saying it just evolves into Mew because of the fan theory where Ditto is a failed clone of Mew. But I didn't do that for two reasons. The first is that if Ditto is a failed clone, how could it ever reach the true form? And secondly, and more importantly, I had several other unevolving Pokemon that I was stuck on for a really long time, and Ditto solved my problem. So I present to you this: Ditto branch evolves into the 4 Galar fossils. Just think about it. Dracozolt, Arctozolt, Dracovish, and Arctovish are not supposed to exist. They're other creatures Frankensteined together. This tripped me up for a while because how could they evolve if they're not genetically legitimate? Ditto can't even breed with them. And like, they can't turn into each other. And then it hit me. The only thing that can copy these chimeras is Ditto. So what if a Ditto evolves into a Galar fossil by transforming into it and getting stuck? Because the new form is so genetically corrupted. It's weird and completely insane, but so are the Galar fossils. Next is Aerodactyl, and its gray coloring and rock typing reminded me of another rock Pokemon that I think is a perfect fit. Aerodactyl evolves from Pupitar. It could be a Wurmple into Silcoon or Cascoon situation that happens one stage later. So the Larvitar enters the pupa phase, and then it either remains grounded, becoming Tyranitar, or it metamorphizes into a flying form, like a beautiful, violent butterfly. Next is Unknown, and at first I thought this would be impossible. How am I gonna connect letters to anything? But then I noticed something. Unknown's black coloring and white round eyes look a lot like parts of another unevolving Pokemon. One that I realized made perfect sense. Unknown could evolve into Sigilif. Not only are both psychic type, but Sigilif uses its psychic power to fly, which is what Unknown is doing. It has Levitate. But also their lore aligns beautifully. Unknown's literal first dex entry says their shapes look like hieroglyphs on ancient tablets. Hieroglyphs, glyphs, Sigilif. So Unknown represent the ancient writing, but then Sigilif are the guardians of ancient cities. Maybe in the ancient civilizations, an Unknown that gets strong enough becomes a Sigilif and gets promoted from the library to guard duty. And again, black with circular eyes. This evolution is one of my favorites in the whole video because it went from seemingly impossible to one of the most logical ones. Next is Shuckle, and while I don't adore this answer, I think it makes the most sense for it to be a split evolution from Dwebble. They're both bug rock types living in shells, so maybe a Dwebble that wants to go fully defensive becomes Shuckle. And of course, hermit crabs and endoliths, which is what Shuckle is based on, are not the same creatures. Remoraid turns into Octillery. We can make some leaps here and there. I actually think the Dwebble evolution could branch 3 ways. Crustal like normal, Shuckle for defense, and Cloth if the housing fuses to its body so completely that it loses its bug typing. Next is Delibird, and I am very proud of this one. Delibird is a Christmas bird that carries things in a fabric-like appendage. Bombardier is a dark-type bird that carries things in a fabric-like appendage. Delibird evolves into Bombardier if it gets on the naughty list. Bombardier drops rocks instead of presents. And do you know what happens to be a rock? Coal! Additionally, while it doesn't make as much perfect sense, Delibird could also evolve into Ice-Q. Both are penguin-like and ice-type, so maybe a Delibird that doesn't fly enough gets bogged down by the ice on its head. Also, Ice-Q's Violet entry says, this species rode here on ocean currents from a cold, faraway land. A cold, faraway land, you say? Could that be the North Pole? Skarmory is next and could evolve from Fearow. Both Onyx and Scyther got Steel-type evolutions in Gen 2, and Fearow could have been included in that as well. Fearow and Skarmory are certainly similar enough in appearance, at least as close as Scyther and Scizor. Both birds even have a head crest. To make this work perfectly though, Skarmory needs a new name that rhymes with Spearow and Fearow. I propose Gearo. Gears are often metal, but it could also refer to gear like equipment or clothing, things you would find in an armory, which is of course part of Skarmory's original name. Next is Smeargle, and the best fit is having it branch evolve from Shroodle. Simply put, Smeargle and Grafaiai are both normal types that paint. Shroodle could evolve into one or the other depending on its style of expression. Grafaiai focuses on graffiti, while Smeargle gets more versatile but loses the poison power as a result. Side note, this was one of the evolutions that made me decide to ignore stats. Shroodle is actually stronger than Smeargle. Although, maybe it could be like a Nincada Shedinja situation, where it gets weaker overall, but a very specific, very powerful buff. So Shedinja gets Wonder Guard, and Smeargle gets to ruin VGC. Next is Sableye, and it would evolve into the other unevolving dark ghost type, Spiritomb. Of course, the typing works great, it is the same, but there are some other connections you can make. Sableye is feared because these Pokemon are thought to steal the spirits of people when their eyes burn with a sinister glow in the darkness. Meanwhile, Spiritomb was bound to a fissure in an odd keystone as punishment for misdeeds 500 years ago. So what if Sableye becomes Spiritomb when punished? You may think this doesn't work because Spiritomb is formed by 108 spirits, but remember, Sableye is stealing spirits. So maybe once it steals 108, that warrants punishment and results in its binding. And unfortunately for those people, their spirits are still part of the former Sableye. And one more fun bonus. Spiritomb is bound to a plain old rock. Sableye loves eating gemstones, fancy rocks, so being stuck to a bland one that it can't even eat due to its incorporeal form would certainly constitute a punishment. Next is Mawile, and this was tough. I wanted to find a humanoid Pokemon with horns for it to evolve from, because Mawile's huge jaws are actually steel horns that have been transformed. Unfortunately, there were surprisingly few humanoid Pokemon with horns, but the one that ended up making the most sense was Kirlia. Kirlia uses the horns on its head to amplify its psychokinetic power. But what if it somehow loses that psychic power? The fairy type remains, and it stays as a generally small humanoid and feminine creature, like Mawile, but it needs a new way to protect itself. So the horns mutate, grow large, and harden to steel, allowing it to defend itself even without psychic power. It keeps its red eyes though, which is a nice touch.
Ha! It is I, Grunty Boy. Whew.
Hey man, why are you breathing so hard?
I just got done with a run.
Nice. But why run when you can basically teleport, like you do every time you enter this room?
Teleporting does nothing for my cholesterol levels. But anyways, I wanted to thank you for recommending the bone conduction headphones to me from the sponsor of this video, Raycon. The bone conduction headphones use off-ear audio by sending vibrations through your bones, giving you clear sound without blocking out the world around you. That's really important for safety on my runs, so I can stay aware of my surroundings.
Makes sense, don't want to get hit by traffic.
I was actually more worried about getting stabbed. Being a criminal does make some enemies, but don't worry about me, I'm very fast. I can run a 20-minute mile.
That's not fast at all.
You're not fast at all.
Anyways, I love them too. Plus, they have 13 hours of battery life, a fit that won't slip, and they're IP68 waterproof, so no need to worry about sweat or rain. And they of course come with Raycon's 30-day happiness guarantee.
If you want premium performance without the premium price tag, scan the QR code on screen, click the link in the description below, or go to buyraycon.com/MandJTVBC to get 20% off the bone conduction headphones. Again, that's buyraycon.com/MandJTVBC.
Well, my friend, keep up the good work on the exercise front.
Why, thank you. Hoping to break a 1930 mile time by Christmas. Ta-ta!
Next are Plusle and Minun. And here I'm just gonna cover all the other unevolving electric rodents as well: Pachirisu, Emolga, Dedenne, Togedemaru, and Morpeko. These took a long time to decide because I was just so lost. Like, do they evolve into each other? But which ones are the strong ones? And also there's more than 3? Like, how do I handle this? I did eventually land on something stupid, but somewhat logical. They all evolve from Pichu. Wait, let's go Eevee and let's go Pikachu, but Pikachu isn't the lowest form. We could just allow Pichu to evolve into a bunch of different Pokemon, just like Eevee, but way worse, because they're all electric type still. Look, I don't think all the evolutions in this video should happen. I'm just trying to find the most logical fit. And they are called Pika clones, so evolving from Pichu, like, it's not that crazy. Volbeat and Illumise are next, and they're another clear candidate for a connecting baby. Actually, no, that's not what makes the most sense. What makes the most sense is them being the same Pokemon. Like Nidoran male and Nidoran female, Volbeat and Illumise were introduced before gender differences. If they'd been added later, they'd be one Pokemon. It doesn't even matter that their stat spreads are different. That's true for male and female Basculegion. But since I can't fuse them, I propose they evolve from Joltik. Volbeat and Illumise could have been bug electric due to their light-emitting heinies, so having a split evolution from a bug electric type makes sense to me. Galvantula builds electrified webs, while the Firefly Pokemon build relationships. Torkoal would simply evolve into Turtonator. I know they're different types of turtles and don't look particularly similar, but they are both fire turtles, and in this case, that's good enough for me. Turtonator is the more evolved one because it is bigger and has 2 types instead of 1. Additionally, Raihan uses both Torkoal and Turtonator, so maybe Torkoal is a dragon after all. Spinda is next, and I think a surprisingly logical evolution for it is nearby in the dex. Zangoose. Both are normal type, found near Fall Arbor Town, and a lighter color contrasted with a reddish color. Red pandas and mongoose are not super closely related, but at least they're both carnivorous mammals. I like to think that a Spinda could evolve into a Zangoose once it has experienced combat with Zangoose's sworn enemy, Seviper. They essentially lock in. Their eyes focus, their color contrast increases, and they gain battle scars. The uniqueness of the spots on Spinda go away because their scars affect their fur patterns. Speaking of Seviper, it is next, and the easiest thing to do is make it a branched evolution from Ekans. Sure, most branch evolutions have type differences, while Arbok and Seviper are the same type, but so are all the Hitmons, Slowbro and Slowking, and Huntail and Gorbis. So this is fine. Lunatone and Solrock are yet another pair that could be easily connected by a mutual baby. But the difference with them is that the baby already exists. Solrock and Lunatone could evolve from Minior. They're all Meteorite Pokemon, but Minior is the smallest and thus works best as the base form. Minior evolves and loses its flying type, replacing it with Levitate, and gains psychic powers. Maybe the red, orange, and yellow Minior could evolve into Solrock, while the green, blue, indigo, and purple evolve into Lunatone. The shiny one can be a coin flip. It works great! Except for the fact that Shields Down Minior is actually stronger than Solrock and Lunatone. But remember, I don't care about stats. Next is Castform, my beloved cute little weather Pokemon. I really struggled with this. No Pokemon works quite the same. I considered having it evolve into Rotom due to the form changing and similar body types, but why go from normal to Electric Ghost and suddenly ignore weather for appliances? That would have worked okay, but then I realized there was a better option. Castform can evolve into 3 different Pokemon: Groudon, Kyogre, and Rayquaza! It's the weather Pokemon! It should evolve into the Weather Gods! It'll be Hoenn's version of Cosmog! Not only does it make perfect sense, but it's the power upgrade that Castform deserves! Glory to Castform! Ascend to legend! You will find that some evolutions in this video will be very well researched, super thought out, and others are just gonna be personal preference. The next two Pokemon in the decks have evolutions that make sense, but I don't love because they involve starters. Kecleon would evolve from Drizzile, and Tropius would evolve from Bayleaf. These are the best fits logically. The whole Sobble line can turn invisible when wet, so some Drizzile could learn to use that ability anytime, but lose their water type in the process, thus becoming Kecleon. Meanwhile, Bayleaf and Tropius are both grass-type long-neck dinosaurs. They're so similar that in the episode of the anime where Ash's Grovyle evolves into Sceptile, the Meganium Grovyle likes ends up picking a Tropius instead. Starters don't have split evolutions though. They have regional forms, but not splitting into two different species, so that's why this doesn't feel quite right. However, if Drizzile and Bayleaf were not starters, this is a slam dunk. So because of that and the fact that I couldn't figure out any other good options, I'm sticking with these picks. Next is Absol. And my evolution pick is gonna at first sound weird, but I promise it works really well, so just hear me out. Absol would be a split evolution from Gothorita. Hear me out! I said hear me out! Absol has the ability to foretell the coming of natural disasters. It sharply senses even subtle changes in the sky and the land to predict natural disasters. It appears from deep in the mountains to warn people about upcoming disasters it has sensed with its horn. In short, Absol sees the future, at least part of it, by reading environmental signs, and then tries to warn people and save them from the disasters that it has predicted. Now, let's look at another Pokemon that can see the future based on environmental signs. That being Gothitelle. It gazes at the stars to predict the future. It acts somewhat detached because it has seen the end of all existence. A criminal who was shown his fate by a Gothitelle went missing that same day and was never seen again. Gothitelle unleashes psychic energy and shows opponents dreams of the universe's end. So Gothorita gains some kind of future sight upon evolution, but it could have two paths. It could use that power to save people, or that power makes it detached and even cruel. Gothitelle is the latter path, but Absol is the former. However, in a bitter twist of fate, the cruel one remains psychic type, while the kind one ends up as a dark type due to misunderstanding. Long ago, superstitions were spread about it, saying it brought disaster. This fed a hatred of it, and it was driven deep into the mountains. The lore for this evolution works, but the appearance is trickier. Sure, both Gothorita and Absol are black and white, but how does a humanoid Pokemon turn into a cat? Well, it turns out that Absol might be more human than you think. According to Bulbapedia, Absol is based on the Baizhi. Sorry if I mispronounced that. A Chinese mythological creature that is sometimes shown to have a human head. Additionally, Absol's humanized face and feline appearance may also be an homage to the Sphinx. Its ruff resembling long human hair and a male lion's mane, and the white fur on the top of its head, loosely resembling the headpiece of an Egyptian sphinx, also suggest this. It also resembles a Lamassu, an Assyrian creature with a human's head, wings, and sometimes with the body of a lion. Baizhi, Sphinx, and Lamassu. All mythical creatures that, at least sometimes, have feline bodies and human heads. So humanoid Gothorita transforms into Sphinx Absol for better mobility to thus do a better job of warning people. I know it might have initially seemed confusing and random, but I gotta say I'm pretty proud of coming up with this evolution. It's another one of my favorites from this video. Next is Relicanth, which is famous for not evolving over the course of millions of years. However, over a decade ago, my God, I made a YouTube video covering a Pokemon theory originally created by Reddit user Cyberus, suggesting that some Relicanth Darwinian evolved, as in slowly over millennia, into Basculin. The two fish Pokemon do actually have quite a lot in common, and I thought the theory was fun. As a nod to that theory, I think it could go in reverse. Basculin could evolve into Relicanth by going through its own kind of primal reversion. I feel like this direction works better for a regular evolution, since Basculin would be gaining a type, not losing it. However, there's another excellent Basculin evolution candidate that needs an evolution in this video. That Pokemon is Veluza. Like Basculin, Veluza is a vicious predatory fish, and it has the ability Mold Breaker, the hidden ability for all the Basculin forms. This works out really nicely. Red Stripe Basculin can become either Relicanth or Veluza, while Blue Stripe becomes the other. As for which one becomes which, I think both work for both. Relicanth has a red dot on its side, but it shares the Rock Head ability with Blue Stripe. Veluza's fins are a mix of red and blue, some kind of purplish pinkish, but I think they're a bit closer to red. However, it tastes more like Blue Stripe Basculin. Yes, you heard me correctly. This is now a culinary discussion. Blue Stripe Basculin used to be a common food source. They apparently have an inoffensive, light flavor. When Veluza discards unnecessary flesh, its mind becomes honed and its psychic power increases. The spare flesh has a mild but delicious flavor. Inoffensive and light is just like saying mild. But compare that to Red Stripe Basculin's flavor. In the past, it often appeared on the dinner table. The meat of Red Striped Basculin is on the fatty side, and it's more popular with the youth. Since Blue Stripes taste more like Veluza, that indicates more similarities on a cellular level. Therefore, White Basculin becomes Basculegion, Red Basculin becomes Relicanth, and Blue Basculin becomes Veluza. Next is Love Disc, the inspiration for this video, because it is quite weird that it does not evolve into Alomomola. They're pink, heart-shaped fish, and while Love Disc is focused on love and Alomomola healing, that's kind of the same thing. It's like a compassion thing. However, I also think that Love Disc could have a branched evolution into Alomomola and Bruxish. It doesn't work as nicely, but it is a pink fish. Maybe it becomes Alomomola if it's surrounded by true love, and Bruxish if surrounded by shallow vanity. Chatot is next, and I immediately noticed that it and Squawkabilly have a lot in common. Not only are they normal flying, noisy parrots, but all four of Squawkabilly's colorations appear somewhere on Chatot's body. Now, it doesn't work with the stats quite right, but we're ignoring those. So I think Squawkabilly should evolve into Chatot, because Chatot's design feels more evolved to me. By having all four colors, Chatot is maintaining a former piece of itself, regardless of its starting form. But I'm not done. Squawkabilly has 4 forms, and you know what other unevolving bird has 4 forms? Oricorio! A Squawkabilly that commits to being noisy and chattering becomes Chatot, but one that discovers the quieter and more tasteful art of dance becomes Oricorio, depending on its color. Yellow becomes Pom-Pom and blue becomes Sensu, and then the other ones don't work quite as nicely. But I'll say that white becomes Pau because of the off-white dress, and green becomes Baile because that's all that's left. Now, Squawkabilly cannot change its form while Oricorio can, but we're not gonna worry about that and explain it away with the freedom of dance. Carnivine could be an alternate evolution for Weepinbell, since they're both carnivorous plants. It doesn't look much like Weepinbell and loses the poison type, which makes it perfect, since those things are also true for the Gloom into Bellossom evolution. Before we continue, if you've watched this far into the video, you probably enjoy what I do here, so please take a moment to consider subscribing or checking to see if you're subscribed. Getting close to 2.5 million, and that's pretty exciting, so thank you. I hit my mic, damn it! Next we have Rotom, and a Pokemon the fandom has connected to it many times is Shuppet. They're both ghost types with a single horn, so some have had the idea that Rotom evolves into Shuppet with a Reaper Cloth. I want the opposite, since not only is Rotom clearly more powerful, but I think it makes for a better story. Shuppet split evolves into Rotom by casting aside its cloak and thirst for negative emotions, instead of letting vengeance consume it, fusing with the cloak and turning into Banette. As a Rotom, it still likes mischief, but it is visibly more joyous, and instead of eating malice, it eats your Instagram stories. Audino is Unova's Chansey, but an evolutionary relationship between the two would be loose at best. They're normal type and heal, but look nothing alike. However, Audino, as its name suggests, focuses on sound. And I know just the sound-based normal type that it could evolve from. Audino could be a split evolution from Loudred. A Loudred that keeps being loud becomes Exploud, while one that calms down becomes Audino. Sock and Throw are another pair that definitely should be linked by a mutual baby. They're Unova's version of Hitmonchan and Hitmonlee, all male fighting types that are obviously related, and the Hitmon's got Tyrogue. But since I can't make up a baby, Sock and Throw will also evolve from Tyrogue. Again, these are basically Hitmons. So like, what's two more? Maybe Tyrogue can evolve into Sock or Throw when given clothing. Oh, Master has given Tyrogue a gi! Maractus is easy. It would be an alternate evolution for Cacnea that's much friendlier than Cacturn. Cryogonal is a unique Pokemon. It's essentially one big floating face of sentient ice. Wait, that's not unique? That's just like Glalie! Snorunt gets a third branched evolution into Cryogonal, where instead of a ghost lady or hard ice, it turns into fragile snow. Stunfisk is a fish that isn't water type that wallows in the mud. This reminded me of another ground type fish, Whiscash, which lives in the bottoms of swamps. I don't think it's a crazy logical leap to have Barboach branch evolve into Stunfisk or Whiscash, depending on whether it wants to be more aggressive or lay itself as a trap. Druddigon is a weird Pokemon. It has wings but cannot fly. It is a blue pure dragon with stone-like body parts that is not rock type. And then I realized something. That all reminds me of Bagon. Druddigon could be an alternate evolution for Bagon, specifically those that do not have the patience to go through the cocoon-like Shelgon phase. The Bagon powers up sooner, but its wings never fully grow, and thus Druddigon cannot fly. As it sees the Salamence that were patient enough, it grows jealous of their flying abilities, and the rocky part of Bagon's head expands and turns red with rage, creating Druddigon's spiky head. It could serve as a lesson in patience and hard work. Next is Bouffalante, and while its bovine nature connects to Tauros and Miltank, as I said earlier, they all feel equal in evolution stage, so I couldn't make the connection work. But what does work surprisingly well is having Bouffalante evolve from Dubwool. While a sheep is not a bison, both are in the family Bovidae, distinct from Bovinae, which is a subfamily and thus more specific. Dubwool and Bouffalante also share the normal type, long horns, and round fluffy hair that absorbs impact. I think Bouffalante makes more sense as the final form, since Dubwool is smaller. Although interestingly, they have the same BST. Next is Heatmore, and its most distinct feature is its flame-covered tongue that it uses to feed on Durant. What's another Pokemon with its tongue as a major defining feature? Heatmore could evolve from Lickitung. Licky Licky keeps doing the same thing as Lickitung, but some Lickitung could specialize into targeting a specific prey, and thus become Heatmore. The one sticking point is that Lickitung is either amphibian or reptilian. It's either a salamander or a lizard, while Heatmore is a mammal. It's an anteater. So those are not that closely related. However, allow me to remind you, Remoraid and Octillery, Remora and Octopus, wildly unrelated animals. They're not even in the same phylum. Whereas reptiles and mammals are both in the phylum Chordata. Okay? So like, this is fine. Next is Heatmore's prey, Durant. And speaking of related animals, do you know what other insects are actually very closely related to ants? The order, which is a pretty specific categorization level, Hymenoptera, includes ants alongside bees and wasps. Additionally, all insects in that order have a worm-like larval stage and an inactive pupal stage before they reach adulthood. Larva, pupa, adult. Sounds just like Weedle, Kakuna, and Beedrill. Durant would be a branched evolution from Kakuna. It just burrows instead of stinging. Furfrou is a hairy dog, which reminded me of Stoutland. Thus, it could be a branched evolution from Herdier. Vain Herdier become Furfrou, while those that don't care to get regular trims become Stoutland. Next is Hawlucha, the first fighting flying type, and the haw in its name means that it is partially based on hawks, which are birds of prey, also known as raptors, like Staraptor. Hawlucha could be a branched evolution from Staravia. The Starly line is already one that's keen on combat. They maintain huge flocks, although fierce scuffles break out between various flocks. It has a savage nature. It will courageously challenge foes that are much larger. That last line sounds just like Hawlucha. Although its body is small, its proficient fighting skills enable it to keep up with big bruisers like Machamp and Hariyama. The Starly line combat focus is also demonstrated by Staraptor learning close combat upon evolution. It's easily within the realm of possibility that some Staravia would opt for less flight, more fight. Additionally, both Staraptor and Hawlucha are vain. Staraptor fusses over the shape of its comb, while Hawlucha always strikes a pose before going for its finishing move. It's also worthy of note that Staraptor's hair is red, a major color on Hawlucha. Carbink is easy. Some could evolve into Diancie. Diancie is literally a sudden transformation of Carbink. That's what an evolution is. I actually think it would have been really interesting and totally realistic if instead of distributing Diancie as the mythical event Pokemon, they distributed an item that you could then use to evolve one of your Carbink. Klefki is a weird little steel type with an odd face and is inspired by a man-made object, which sounds just like Clink. Klefki could be a branched evolution from Clink, not Clang. I think it'd be weird if it got big and then small again. And sure, that means that one branched line evolves further, but that's allowed thanks to Diplin getting Hydrapple, while Flapple and Appleton cannot evolve. Wishiwashi is a pitifully weak fish that gains strength by merging with many of its comrades and turning into a huge, strong blue and white fish. But what if one Wishiwashi got strong enough alone? What if one was so gluttonous that it somehow ate enough to transform into something similar to school form Wishiwashi, but permanently? That Wishiwashi could evolve into Dondozo. Big, gluttonous, blue and white, and strong. It is a somewhat weaker but permanent school form Wishiwashi. Next is Comfey, a fairy-type Pokemon that, despite being mostly flowers, is not a grass type. Remind you of any other Pokemon? This is just like the Florges line. Comfey could be a branched evolution of Floette. Those that become Comfey focus on healing and support, while those that become Florges have more of a tendency for, violence. Next are Oranguru and Passimian, another pair of counterparts that could easily have a connecting baby. Does it become the nerd or the jock? I do think the best fit for this baby is a totally new Pokemon, but if I must choose an existing one, Aipom makes the most sense, just because it's a monkey. That's all I got. Therefore, Aipom would evolve into Ambipom, Passimian, or Oranguru. Next is Pyukumuku, a little sea blob with kinda spikes on it. It reminds me a lot of Pincurchin, but I struggled to see how they could evolve into each other. They feel too equal in power. So let's check the taxonomy. Pyukumuku is a sea cucumber, while Pincurchin is a sea urchin, both of which are aquatic invertebrates in the phylum Echinodermata. Phylums are pretty broad. But let's just keep going because I don't know what else to do. Echinoderms include starfish, brittle stars, sea urchins, sand dollars, and sea cucumbers. Starfish, you say? Close enough. Pyukumuku and Pincurchin become branched evolutions of Staryu. It kinda works. A little bit. Pyukumuku's mouth is a star, and it has 6 spikes, like Starmie has 6 points. And Pincurchin is kind of like a star itself. It's pointy and electric, so it glows. This one is not the best in the video, I admit. Komala is based on a koala bear, which is actually not a bear, it's just a koala, a marsupial with no relation to real bears. But then another sleepy, normal type, somewhat connected to bears Pokemon, is Snorlax. I think Komala could be a split evolution from Munchlax, where it gets sleepier than Snorlax, literally always being asleep, but nowhere near as gluttonous, leading to its much smaller size. Mimikyu is an easy pick for me. It would evolve from Pikachu. Mimikyu's whole thing is that it's horrifying, but that it wants to be loved and adored like Pikachu. But what if it wants to look like Pikachu, not because it's the series mascot, but because it used to be a Pikachu? But then something happened that disfigured it, forcing it to cover itself up and try to look cute again. Drampa is covered in white fluffy fur or feathers, hard to tell which, that remind me of Mega Dragonite's wings. Since those are supposed to be a nod to Dragonair's head wings, it seemed like a logical connection to have Drampa be a split evolution from Dragonair, where the head wings expand to cover many other parts of its body. Drampa doesn't really look like Dragonair, but to be fair, neither does Dragonite. Delmise is a big anchor Pokemon, but it's not actually the anchor itself, as evidenced by the fact it is not steel type. After a piece of seaweed merged with debris from a sunken ship, it was reborn as this ghost Pokemon. Clearly, the best pre-evolution for Delmise would be that seaweed. There is no seaweed Pokemon specifically, but there is one that's quite close. Delmise would be a branched evolution from Tangela, because the whole body is swathed with wide vines that are similar to seaweed. A Tangela that stays on land becomes Tangrowth. One that is lost at sea tangles around some detritus and becomes Delmise. Cramorant is a water-flying aquatic bird Pokemon, so the easy pick is to make it an alternate evolution for Wingull or Ducklet. But I like Ducklet more. Ducklet could become beautiful, graceful Swanna, or it could continue being a goof. Next is Phalanx, which I at first thought would be tricky, but then I realized there's an incredibly obvious answer. Phalanx evolves from Execute. They're both exactly 6 little round guys, so an Execute can evolve into Phalanx when it grows tired of being brittle and broken, so it learns the art of war. Next is Stonjourner, based on Stonehenge, and it has some interesting behaviors. It stands in grasslands, watching the sun's descent from zenith to horizon. Once a year, on a specific date and at a specific time, they gather out of nowhere and form up in a circle. These dex entries seem to be a nod to the possibility of Stonehenge's use as a solar calendar and general relationship to astronomy. While it's not quite the same, this did remind me of another rock-type Pokemon inspired by ancient measurement devices. That Pokemon is Nosepass. Its magnetic nose consistently faces north. Travelers check Nosepass to get their bearings. So Stonehenge could have been used to tell time with the sky, while compasses use the Earth's magnetic field to tell direction. They're not the same thing, but they are similar vibes. Additionally, both Stonjourner and Nosepass move very little. I already mentioned Stonjourner watching the sun, while Nosepass moves less than an inch per year. Thus, I think Stonjourner could be a branched evolution from Nosepass. Next is Indeedee. In addition to butlers and maids, Bulbapedia claims this Pokemon is based on Lares, the household deities in ancient Roman religion, said to protect the house in exchange for worship and gratitude. However, I personally feel that they're more inspired by something that Lares reference. Lares are commonly depicted in pairs and holding Raita, horn-like containers that often depict satyrs, half-goat creatures from Greek mythology. To me, both male and female Indeedee are satyrs themselves due to their goat-like horns. Thus, it makes sense to me that Indeedee becomes a branched evolution from Skiddo. The grass to normal psychic type is kind of a clunky transition, but hey, they're goats, which is pretty goated. And that's just so dumb. Next is Cyclizar, and the clear answer here is that it evolves into Koraidon or Miraidon. Now, I know that it's not supposed to work like this. The legends are past and future versions of Cyclizar, not evolutions. Misdreavus does not evolve into Fluttermane, and this is why I didn't have Delibird evolve into Iron Bundle. However, any other connection to Cyclizar just makes nowhere near as much sense. And I can clearly see an alternate Paldea story where instead of the legend, you ride on Cyclizar for most of the story. Then eventually, through the power of some kind of time travel item, transform and evolve your loyal steed into the story legendary. Next is Orthworm, and while I considered dubbing it a smaller, sleeker, and sillier version of Steelix, I opted for a different serpentine Pokemon, one that it could evolve from. Orthworm could evolve from Dunsparce. Both are serpentine, as I said, burrow and dig without being ground type themselves, have light blue somewhere on their body, and have extra appendages. Maybe Dunsparce's little wings turn into the tendrils Orthworm uses to attack. Next is Flamigo, and when deciding this, I immediately looked for other long neck bird Pokemon. One caught my eye immediately, Doduo. With its long legs and spherical body, I could see a strong connection to Flamigo. There's a problem though. What happens to the other head? Pokemon gain heads through evolution, not the other way around. Wait, actually, that's not true. Cherubi's little bulb head goes away when it becomes Cherim, and female Combee has 3 faces, while Vespiquen has just 1. So this could work. Alarmingly well, actually, because I know what happens to the other head. This Pokemon apparently ties the base of its neck into a knot, so that energy stored in its belly does not escape from its beak. Flamigo is a branched evolution from Doduo that happens when one head swallows the other. The energy of that head remains in its belly, but it escapes if Flamigo unties its neck. It's dark and gross, but pretty fun. And now for the final Pokemon of the video, Tatsugiri. It's clearly based on sushi, but Bulbapedia says Tatsugiri also somewhat resembles the koi fish, which, like Tatsugiri, has many colored varieties. I noticed this and started looking for koi Pokemon. Goldeen and Seaking could be partially based on koi in addition to fancy goldfish, but I struggled to make an evolution connection. But then a different Pokemon caught my attention. Magikarp. If you didn't know, carp and koi are actually the same species. It's just that koi are selectively bred to look prettier. Additionally, Magikarp's evolution into Gyarados may be based on a legend about how carp that leaped over the Dragon Gate would become dragons. Yet Gyarados is not a dragon type, but Tatsugiri is. Magikarp is both weak and stupid. I'm sorry, Magikarp fans, that is what it is. This weak and pathetic Pokemon gets easily pushed along rivers when there are strong currents. Then as for stupid, its reckless leaps make it easy pickings for predators. On the bright side, many Pokemon enjoy longer lifespans thanks to Magikarp. Weak and stupid. So maybe Magikarp could split evolve into Gyarados or Tatsugiri depending on which of those problems it solves. Gyarados is incredibly powerful, but it destroys things recklessly. Maybe as some kind of divine punishment for its vicious nature, it does not get to be a dragon type. even ending up dark type in its mega form when it could have easily turned water dragon. As for Tatsugiri, it's one of the most intelligent dragon Pokemon. It camouflages itself by inflating its throat sac. This Pokemon tricks its opponents by playing dead. It is small and weak, but it uses its smarts to survive. Additionally, Magikarp has a ton of color variations in the game Magikarp Jump. This is reminiscent of Tatsugiri's color variations. So a dumb, mean, and strong Magikarp? That's Gyarados. But a weak, yet smart one, that's Tatsugiri. And I think that's really fun. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to see another one of my videos where I have some fun changing Pokemon info, check out my video where I pick out a new pseudo-legendary Pokemon for all of the types that don't yet have one.